Good evening, folks. If you watch this channel, you probably know that I'm super into reading, and you probably yourself are also into reading as well. So I have a stack of books laying in front of me, and I also thought I'd share a beer with you. I'm hiding the brand. And I figured I'd take you through my favorite books of the last 5 years. So basically the last 5 years have been when I most got into reading, which was a little over 5 years ago, my senior year of college, really. So I'm just going to take you through my favorite books that I've read. And I purposely limited it to no more than 10, because if I didn't, I'd probably just talk about every single book that I've read, and that would kind of lose its meaning. So here we go. I'm going to jump right in, and contrary to what people do, I'm actually going to there's not really a specific order here, but I'm going to kind of take you through like order from my favorite to kind of like quote unquote least favorite that I've read, but still in like the top 10. But it's really hard to kind of subjectively pinpoint which one was the best or which ones were better than others. But I think this is a pretty good spot as to what my favorites have been the last 5 years. So let me get into it. First one, Waking Up with Sam Harris. I was a huge Sam Harris fan. Kind of when I started getting into his podcast about 3 years ago or so, maybe 2 years. I first listened to him on Joe Rogan, and then I listened to his podcast then, but it was so dry and almost too informative that I got bored and couldn't pay attention and couldn't focus, so it was so hard for me to get through an episode. But about 2 years ago, I got into his podcast a lot more. And this was, I think, the first book of his that I read. So the subtitle is A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. And the reason why I really, really like this book, it's kind of short, it's not too long, pretty easy read, but also super interesting at the same time, is because he takes an approach of possible experiences of the mind that have nothing to do with religion, but they're more so kind of peak experiences that you can have, that you don't have to add any layer of kind of spirituality, religion, or any layer of kind of voodoo, crazy woo-woo stuff. But it kind of takes a scientific approach to kind of peak possible experiences out there of the mind, and kind of uses meditation to kind of meditation and mindfulness to kind of help guide you to that. I don't know if that's the right word or phrase, and also kind of talks about even drugs and their utility. Obviously, drugs that are not harmful to you, but I would let you pick this book up, read that one. He also has a really good short podcast he did himself, about 20 minutes long. It's called Drugs and the Meaning of Life. If you don't actually want to read this book, look that little excerpt up where he just kind of takes you through kind of what it entails to live the quote-unquote good life. And I think that's really good, and it's almost kind of a summary of this book, but you don't actually have to read the book. Let's see, what else do we have here? I forgot a book, but... Oh, no, I didn't. I'd have to say next, probably, would be Brave New World. So I read that a little over a year ago. I read it down in Fort Myers. First Aldous Huxley book I read. Didn't know much about it, but I knew it was kind of a book that, like, kind of a legendary book that everyone says is great. And it was, I believe, during the time I was kind of watching, or shortly after the time I watched Black Mirror, which is basically just a dystopian TV show. So what better to cap that off than with a dystopian novel? And this was awesome. Like, every little bit of it was awesome, and it's kind of very Black Mirror-ish, talking about the future and kind of where a possible future we could be headed to, just if we just keep ramping up technology and kind of our mindset and values in regards to technology. And it's, again, something that like seems like it'd be a great idea but it's, again, that's what a dystopian novel is. And I think it's like he gets so many things right, and then he updates it after the book was released, and he has a little updated version in the back of this one where he talks about things he thinks he might have been wrong on, or things that in this book he talks about that are still very accurate. And again, it's kind of crazy because he gets a lot of things right. Where to now? Probably have to say next, Sapiens. Boom, read this about 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years. I've actually seen some people online hate on this book, which I'm not sure why. It's the subtitle, A Brief History of Humankind, which is like the perfect subtitle because that's exactly what it is. Super awesome writer, really digestible, and he takes you from basically when humans first came to the planet to where we're at now, and super great because I've learned a lot of things that I thought I knew that were wrong, or just I had no idea of. Again, super digestible, but a lot of good information in there. Next, we'll have, or probably go next here, we'll go with 1984. I actually read this past Christmas in Fort Myers. And another one very similar to Brave New World in the kind of a dystopian novel realm, but I think Brave New World is better. 1984, it's dystopian, but it takes more of the authoritarian approach, kind of what life could be like if our governments like really took advantage of all the people living, and how kind of like the class system kind of plays into that. And I'm sure most people have, if they haven't read it, have definitely heard of it. Go grab it if you haven't read it. Super. I basically couldn't put it down. I'd wake up hungover, grab some coffee, and read it in the morning in Florida. Okay. And next, we'll go with, we'll go with here. This is called The Truth by Neil Strauss. It's called, the subtitle, An Uncomfortable Book About Relationships. And I read this probably 4 years ago now. And if you don't know who Neil Strauss is, he's a phenomenal writer and makes things just super, super interesting and fun to read. But he takes you through kind of, and I'll mention here at the end his other book that I really like, but he takes you through his kind of life of, he essentially kind of was a sex addict, and it like completely screwed up his relationship, and he goes through therapy, and he just takes you through his whole journey of having this problem of kind of sexual addiction, and how that affected his relationship at the time, and his kind of world just goes crazy, kind of way up, way down. It's kind of a crazy life he lived at one point, and how he kind of made it through all that and kind of found what was most important to him. Super, super good book, and honestly, anything he writes is probably going to be pretty good. Next we got Freedom and Neurobiology, with the subtitle Reflections on Free Will, Language, and Political Power. So pretty short book here. And I like this because if you've listened to me at all, I got kind of interested in the concept or topic of free will 2 years ago or so, and it kind of just fascinated me. And he takes you through, like, from a very, like a reasoned and rational approach, kind of like a first principle approach of how free will and like the arguments against free will or for free will don't make sense or do make sense. So he kind of lays out this format of kind of what would have to be real and factual if free will did exist, and he kind of is arguing with himself and puts up arguments against his position throughout the whole thing. And if you're kind of into that kind of dry, very logical and rational approach to things, it's really good. And then the second half or last third is about politics in regards to that as well. But short and good. I like it. It's dry, but it's short enough that, and there's very informative, that it was easy to get through. And probably the last one here, Reasons and Persons. So honestly, I bought this book because it was one of Sam Harris's top 3 books that he's ever read, that he mentioned in an interview. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to buy it. And it was probably, so if you look at it, it doesn't look too thick, but if you look at it, there's like so many words on a page. And I don't know if you're like me, where when pages like kind of old school style are written like this, it's super hard for me to read. And this book is dry to the deepest sense of the word dry. But for some reason, honestly, when I started reading it, I was like, there is no way I'm going to get through it. But I kept plugging along and found myself like super engaged in it, and like just kept plugging away without even like thinking like then all of a sudden I'm done with it. I'm like, man, so maybe that was pretty good. And it was. It's all about moral. It's like almost like you could say the Bible of moral philosophy, and he takes you through kind of like self-interest theory, consequential utilitarianism, kind of consequentialism, and then takes you through kind of practical dilemmas of kind of each moral theory and where they hold up, where they don't, into actual practical cases, and then even goes into like moral mathematics. So again, super dry, but like I found myself, the beginning's a little hard to get through, but the end, the last third to last half is really good. So those are probably my favorite books I've read in the last 5 years or so. And I'm going to take you through a few honorable mentions now. So first we have Free Will here by Sam Harris. This book is, let's see here, super short. Maybe. It is 66 pages, and it's like you could read this in probably a half hour if you really wanted to. But he takes you through his argument for or against free will, or you could say for the illusion of free will, and he basically argues throughout the whole book of why free will doesn't actually exist, and how believing that it doesn't exist, believing that it doesn't exist, how that can even, how like kind of real world practical, like the real world practicality of that. Because a lot of people think, oh, if free will doesn't exist, like, why don't I just sit on my ass and don't do anything? Well, you simply try that. You're not going to, under no free will of your own. You're going to end up going out and get moving. But he also takes you through kind of a law argument with that, as well as how that should actually kind of change how we think about punishment in the judicial system if no one actually has free will, no one created their own genes, no one picked their parents, no one picked their environment they grew up in, and how that should kind of reflect in our punishment of crime. And here, 48 Laws of Power, pretty thick one, but in senior year of college I got into Robert Greene, and this was his first book I read. Really, really good book. Basically, he takes you through 48 laws that kind of if I remember correctly, he wrote this book because he was a writer in Hollywood, and he realized how kind of like dirty it was, and how shady it was, how shady other people were to other people, and how it was like you just have to find a way to like get by and just only look out for yourself. So he put together this book that has 48 laws on kind of how to get ahead and be ahead in the real world. And he takes you through each law. He takes you through 2 or 3 historical examples of somebody or a group of people using this law to their advantage, and why you should want to use that law as well. So Law 1, never outshine your master. Law 10, infection, avoid the unhappy and unlucky. Law 20, do not commit to anyone. Law 30, make your accomplishments seem effortless. Law 40, despise the free lunch. And Law 48, assume formlessness. Now, some of these might not make sense on their head, but they make a lot more sense when he mentions historical examples. So how he breaks down each one, he'll mention the law, and then he talks about the transgression of the law, an observance of the law historically. Like, so transgression means when somebody didn't use it to their advantage and it kind of bit them in the ass. And then the keys to power from that law, and then kind of the reversal of the law. So honestly, really, really interesting book. Really liked it at the time. Honestly, now that I look at it, I might have to go back and read it again, or some of it again. And last one I will mention that I don't have physically is, boom, right here. So The Game is another book by Neil Strauss, and I read that senior year of college. My roommate had it, and the book is about the pickup artist community. And it is, again, Neil Strauss is just a fantastic writer, and that book was, I read that super fast because it was so interesting and kind of like hilarious. It's a group of people that just like, and honestly, there's a lot of practical, useful information in there that I think people could actually use. It could serve them to like kind of know some of this stuff. But it's kind of like a group of guys that you would never like understand the way they were living and like kind of what their goals were within this community. It was kind of really, really crazy. And again, that kind of relates, or his book, The Truth, kind of almost picks up years down the line after that book, where Neil Strauss was this super nerd in high school, couldn't get any girls. Basically, I think he was a virgin until he was, I want to say like 30 or late 20s or so, and then found this pickup artist community and found out, like basically started reading all these forums and books on like ways to pick up girls and kind of how to not inspire, but kind of how to create an inner state within yourself that would attract you to someone, or it would attract another girl to you. And then they just kind of go off the rails on this stuff. And so The Truth picks up after that book's over, where his life is after that book's over, a couple of years down the line, and how he's like basically this kind of became this like sex addict. And I'll just let you read the books if you're interested in it. But that was another really good one, a super fun one, and it's kind of interesting to read that in college at the time. But anyways, there you have it. Maybe you've read some of these, maybe you haven't. Maybe I inspired you to want to pick some of these books up and read them. But those are some, basically my favorite books of the last 5 years. So, cheers. Hope you guys are making it through this pandemic. No better way to make it through than pick up some books.